The objectives of this lesson is to find the cube root, fourth root, and fifth root of a number. Now, before we begin, I want to make a note of something very important. Now, the index, the number that's on the outside of the radical symbol, the little small number in the upper corner, recall that's called the index. And if that number is an even number, then it is called an even root. And the rule with even roots is the radicand, the number underneath the radical symbol, must be a positive. It cannot ever be a negative. Remember, if it's a negative underneath there, then it would equal not a real number. Now, what if the index, the number on the outside, the little tiny number, what if it's an odd number? If it's an odd number, then it's called an odd root. And for odd roots, the rule is that it is perfectly okay for the number, the radicand, to be a positive or negatives. So again, odd roots, the radicand can be either positive or negative. Even roots, the radicand must be a positive. It cannot be a negative. Very important to remember that as you solve your various roots. Let's begin with cube roots. Now you know it's cube root because notice the index, the number on the outer corner here is 3. 3 is an odd number, so that is an odd root, which means it is okay for the radicand to be either negative or positive. Here are your first 5 cube roots. Make sure you know at least the first 5 or have your calculator handy because you can be tested on any of these. So remember that the cube root of a positive number will always equal a positive number, and the cube root of a negative number, notice those that have a negative underneath them, that they equal a negative. Let's do some practice with cube roots. What is the cube root of -1? So just think about it. What I'm asking you is what number, if you were to multiply it 3 times, it's going to equal -1. Well, that number is -1 because if I were to multiply -1 3 times, it is going to equal that original radicand we started with, which was -1. What is the cube root of -8? So again, I want to ask myself, what number, when I multiply it 3 times, will equal -8? And that number is -2. Because if I multiply the number -2 3 times, I'm going to get 8. Now I can do that from left to right, moving -2 times -2, and remember a negative and a negative equals a positive, so that equals +4. And +4 times -2, it does give me -8. Again, notice whenever the radicand is a negative with cube roots, your answer is going to equal a negative. And then in the case if the radicand is a positive, your answer should equal positive. So for the third example, I want to find the cube root of 27. In other words, what number, when you multiply it 3 times, will equal 27? If you said 3, that is correct, because when I multiply the number 3 times, I am going to get 27. What is the cube root of 64? Yes, it is 4. When I multiply the number 4 3 times, it is going to equal 64. Lastly, what is the cube root of negative 125? So what I want to know is what number, when I multiply it 3 times, will equal negative 125. Do you know what that number is? If you said negative 5, then you are correct, because when you multiply negative 5 3 times, you are going to get negative 125. And there you have it, cube roots. Let's move on to fourth root. And you know its fourth root. Notice that the index is now a number 4, which tells you you're going to be dealing with fourth root. Because that is an even number, this is an even root, and with even roots, you are not allowed to have a negative under the radical symbol. Here are your first 5 fourth roots. You should make sure you know your first 5, or have your calculator handy, because those are the ones you could be tested on. Let's do some practice with fourth roots. The first one, we want to find the fourth root of 16. In other words, I want to know what number, when I multiply it 4 times, will equal 16. What number do you think that is? Yes, 2. Number 2. When I multiply the number 2 4 times, I am going to get 16. What is the fourth root of negative 81? In other words, what number, when I multiply it 4 times, will equal negative 81? Well, I don't even need to think about those calculations, because of the fact that this is an even root. Even roots, you're not allowed to have a negative under the radical symbol, so therefore the answer to this is not a real number. Besides, if you think about it, I don't care what number you think of, whether it's a negative number or whether it's a positive number. If you multiply 4 of them, it's going to give you a positive. There is no way that you can multiply a negative or a positive number 4 times and be able to get a negative number. It is just not possible. Let's find the fourth root of 256. I want to know what number, when I multiply it 4 times, will equal 256. So if you have your calculator handy, go ahead and see if you can find the fourth root of 256. Or you can do it mentally. If you said 4, that is correct. If I multiply the number 4 times, it is going to equal 256. And what is the fourth root of negative 625? Again, we don't need to even think about those calculations, because this is an even root. We are not allowed to have a negative under the radical symbol, so therefore the answer would be not a real number. There is no number that when you multiply it 4 times, that is going to yield or result in a negative number. Moving on to fifth root, we know it's fifth root because you notice the index is a 5. And 5 is considered an odd number, which means that it is okay for the radicand to be either negative or positive. Here are your first 5 fifth roots. Make sure you know them or have your calculator handy to help you with that. Keep in mind that the fifth root of a positive number is always going to be a positive number. The fifth root of a negative perfect fifth root will always equal a negative number. Okay, and again, this is perfect fifth roots we're speaking of. Let's do some practice with that. What is the fifth root of 243? In other words, what I'm asking is, what number, when you multiply it 5 times, will equal 243? Do you know what that is? If you said 3, that is correct, because when I multiply the number 3 5 times, it is going to equal 243. Last one, what is the fifth root of negative 1024? And no, the answer is not a real number. You are allowed to have a negative underneath an odd root, so we have to solve this. We want to know what number, when we multiply it 5 times, is going to equal negative 1024. So we know it's going to equal some negative number. What is that negative number? Can you think of it? If you said negative 4, that is correct. If you were to multiply the negative 4 5 times, it is going to equal negative 1024. And there you have it, fifth roots. Objective, we want to find the nth roots of nth powers. Okay, so what we want to look at is we want to look at the meaning of when you have a radicand whose exponent or power that the radicand is raised to is the same as its index. So again, anytime the exponent of the radicand is the same as the index, there's a special rule for that. So let's take a look at that. Those meanings that are in the box there. Let's start with a first example. In this first example, I have the square root of 5 squared. Now, notice here that the index, recall, I said from the very beginning of this lecture that when you don't see an index number on the outside, it is assumed to be a 2, which means you're dealing with square root. So notice that the index is 2, and the number that the radicand is raised to is also 2. When that is the case, when it's the same, and in the case where the radicand is a positive integer, then it's going to equal whatever the radicand is. That is what this first rule is. So if the number, in this case the number is 2, it is an even positive integer, yes it is, then in that case it's going to equal whatever the radicand is. So in this first example, that is going to equal 5. Now, if you really were to multiply that out, you would see that it will equal 5, because what is 5 squared? 5 squared is 25. And what's the square root of 25? The square root of 25 is 5. So however you want to compute it or evaluate it, it's still going to equal 5. Let's look at the next example. So here again, the index 2 is the same as the number is raised to. Whenever the index is the same as the number the radicand is raised to. However, if the radicand is a negative, such as this is the second scenario of the rule, it still equals a positive of the whatever the radicand is. Let me show you why. Okay, so this is going to equal positive 5. But the reasoning for that, if you look at it the other way of computing it, what is negative 5 squared? Negative 5 squared means negative 5 times negative 5, which is positive 25. And what is the square root of positive 25? Yes, it's 5. All this rule is just a quick way of coming up with your answer based on just knowing the fact of these rules. But I want to let you know that if these rules are confusing to you and you don't understand them, then by all means go ahead and compute it the regular way of just simply solving the exponent first and then take that number and take the square root of that number. Whatever way works best for you, but I want to explain this whole rule because when you get to your homework in my math lab, you might have to walk through those steps to solve a problem. So let's look at the next example. Notice here that our index is 4. It is the same as the number that is raised to. So if we look at that case, if n is 4, in this case, it is an even integer. 4 is even, and my radical is a negative number. The radicand, sorry, yeah, there is a negative number that is going to equal the positive of that radical number. So here my radicand is negative 5, but because I have here these even positive integers of the index and the numbers raised to, this is going to equal positive 5. Now you can go ahead and do the math if you'd like. Take negative 5, multiply it 4 times, so you're going to get a really big number. Then find the fourth root of that big number, and I guarantee you, you're going to get 5. Again, I'm just showing you this whole shortcut rule method. So that was even dealing with where n was an even integer. Let's deal with where the n is an odd number. It's an odd integer. So here we have an index of 3, which is the same as what the radicand is raised to 3. Whenever these two numbers are the same and they are an odd number, if the radicand is positive, it's going to equal the positive of that number. So in this case, the radicand is positive 5, so this problem here is going to equal 5. Now you can go ahead and multiply it out and then multiply the number 5 3 times and then take the cube root of that number, and you're still going to get 5 as your answer. Let's move on to the next one. Here, notice the index is the same as the number the radicand is raised to. And in the case of that, where the radicand is a negative number, is going to equal the negative of that. So this is going to equal negative 5. That is going to be the same case as this last example. Here, notice again that the index is 5, the same as the number is raised to. It's an odd integer. and the radicand is a negative, so it's going to equal -5. And there you have it for that rule.